Oh, hey, boys and girls, it's me, Mr. CreepyPasta, and, Billy and I are ready for the holidays, if you can't tell from the lovely tree and all of our festive nature. I'm sure all of you have plans as well, but, I guess... Oh. What is... You guys heard that too, right? Billy, I think we might have an intruder!
Merry Christmas!
Santa Claus?
MCP and Billy, is it?
Yeah, that's us. That is definitely us.
I need your help restoring the spirit of Christmas, and as you know, the Christmas spirit can only be restored with one thing: horror. What truly brings families together is fear.
Well, if Santa Claus needs our help, we can't turn him down, can we? Don't you worry, Santa. We got your back. It's horror story you want, horror story you get. We're restoring the Christmas magic. We're gonna save Christmas. You ready, guys? That's right, Billy. Finally getting what we've always wanted. Saving Santa. Let's see now. What's a good one? A nice Christmas spirity story. I got one. This is gonna be a good one, too. You ready, kids? Because... yes. Here it is. A Christmas I'll never forget. Winter was always the hardest time of year for me out there. Growing up in the north of Britain, the month of December always held connotations of snow and ice to me, but out in the vast Mojave Desert, the winter seemed like a world away. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved the way the heat-singed horizon smashed into the virgin blue sky, the dizzying expanse of bright yet distant stars above my trailer, and the comfortable emptiness of the sands. But every year, when winter rolled in, I always felt like something was missing. I'm not exactly sure when it began, so to speak. These things never have a concrete start date. A man does not simply wake up in the morning having lost his mind. No, insanity, like most of the horrors in the world, is slow. It creeps. It grows. I think, though, the first time I saw it was December 19th. I love to hike, see. On weekends, I pull on my walking boots, grab my map, and just walk out into the desert. There's no better place in the far-flung reaches of the sand wastes to think, to be alone with your thoughts. The 19th was no different. I trudged through the heat, my mind far away, far, far away. For nearly an hour, I wandered wherever my legs took me. Across the brilliant sands, up steep slopes, past the skeletal figures of cacti, lost in thought, the figurative ghosts of my past swirling in the dust, kicked up by my footfalls. I was snapped out of my semi-aware state as my feet set the pebbles in front of me, plummeting down a sheer drop, the dusty rocks giving way to thin air. I swore as I watched the loose chunks of rock tumble into the chasm before me. Disequilibrium washed over me, and I stumbled back away from the edge. Once I was back a good distance from the precipice, I took a deep breath. The view was amazing. I could see for at least 50 miles, maybe more. The straight rods of road pierced the irregular contours of the distant hills. Sand was blown into smooth curves, punctuated by the dark brown pores of scrub and desert grass. The magnificent desolation, as Aldrin had described the surface of the moon, truly felt like the surface of a far distant planet. It was so alien to me, a foreign, inhospitable beauty. Of all the things that view had made me feel, there was one that stuck with me the most. I felt like I was alone, like I was the first man to set foot on this earth, The first man to feel its heat beneath my feet, to trace its curves with my thirsty eyes. There was no one else for 1,000 miles. Something caught my eye a little up on the ridge. In my distraction, I hadn't noticed the dark outline that pierced the skyline like a needle. Tearing my eyes from the allure of the Titanic desert for a second, I saw the viewing tower. It was a haphazard construction of bleached wood perched on the very edge of the cliff. About 10 meters tall, a set of steps ran to a small covered observation deck at the top. Grinning at my discovery, I decided to try my luck and set out in a brisk walk towards it. Once I had straddled the small wire fence that surrounded it, I jogged towards the tower and started to ascend the steps. They creaked loudly, a horrendous cry that echoed across the desert. I could see through the slits down to the floor below as I climbed, my long, ingrained fear of heights beginning to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. Slowly, I made my way to the top and tried the door. It swung inwards, on ancient hinges. The observation deck smelt of dust and dry mold. A thin layer of sandy sediment coated the floor and windows, sent swirling into incorporeal shapes by my forceful entry. In could see the mass graves of flies on the windowsill. Their long-dried and decayed bodies lay, becoming part of the dust. A small magazine rack in one corner was the only furniture. But that didn't matter, because the view was amazing. It was a little after lunch now, and the bright sun reflected off the dunes, creating a glittering mosaic of terracotta and pure white sand. I don't know how long I stood admiring the view. I was probably nearly half an hour mesmerized by its allure. Eventually, I felt myself drifting back into awareness, and blinked rapidly to shake off the sense of disorientation. My interest wandered, eventually falling on the leaflet rack in the corner. That was entirely picked clean, save for one dog-eared pamphlet. Absent-mindedly, I picked it up and gazed on it. The grime-colored surface. Bright red text splashed across the cover displayed the words, "Santa's Christmas Land." My face split into a semi-mocking grin at the unintentionally hilarious photo of the man himself on the front. He looked half asleep, and the false beard strapped to his face was a mangy shade of off-white. Unfolded the flaps. I saw a map listing the park's attractions. Santa's Workshop, Reindeer's Pen, Elves Village, the Christmas House, Winter Pitch and Putt, Polar Ice Tunnel, Nativity Scene. I raised my eyebrows at the list of attractions. The photos were equally as laughable as the one on the front cover. Everything looked cheap or worn out. The so-called Elves Village appeared to be a couple of garden sheds dressed up in tinsel and plastic Christmas trees. The reindeer were plastic as well. Everything was made more bizarre by the fake snow that littered the building, despite the sandy ground and the view of the searing desert behind me. Eyeing the address that was printed on the leaflet's rear, I saw the park was only about an hour's drive away from my trailer. With a chuckle, I folded the leaflet into my pocket and started off back down the steps, stealing one last glance at the unforgiving sands. I awoke at about 12:30 on December 23rd, to the sight of a full ashtray and an empty ibuprofen packet. With a still throbbing headache, I picked my way across the darkened room towards the open bathroom door. "Shit," I muttered, coughing up a wad of thick phlegm from the back of my throat and spitting into the nearby sink with a grimace. My reflection stared back at me through the cracks of the mirror, its eyes dark and baggy behind the grime. I gave it a grin, then regarded it instantly, recoiling at the sight of my plaque-coated teeth. Retreating back towards the bathroom, I straightened out my duvet on the mattress, then looked around the floor for a pair of jeans and a fresh shirt. I pulled on the least creased one and wandered out into the kitchen barefoot, running my hands through my rat's nest of hairs. The linoleum was cold under my feet, yet slightly sticky. As I fell down onto the worn sofa, I felt something sharp pressing into my back pocket. In annoyance, I slid in my hand and pulled out the junk that had prodded me. The offending item was a broken toothpick, which I discarded onto the floor. I rooted around and pulled the rest of the pocket's contents out. There were a few nickels, a tissue, but most interestingly, a folded leaflet. The memory of my hike up to the view tower came flooding back to me, and I smiled despite myself. I smoothed it out and tossed it onto the kitchen counter, distracted by the lure of the TV. Rooting around the litter-strewn floor for the remote, I retrieved it and pushed the big red button. The black box flicked on in front of me, accompanied by an angry hiss of static. I looked up and saw the TV was displaying just the blurry snowstorm that the sound signified. Piece of crap, I muttered, flicking through the channels, all displaying similar grainy screens. After checking a good 20 channels, I hissed in irritation and tossed the remote control away. My attention quickly turned back to the leaflet. I'll be the first to admit it made me curious. I wanted to see it for myself, if it was anything near as entertaining as I had found the leaflet. It would be worth a look. I checked my watch, then pulled the plug on the TV and left the trailer, locking the door behind me. It took me a couple of hours to get to the park. I ended up taking the completely wrong road and heading away from it. After getting in the right track again, I soon pulled up in the car park. It was in the middle of nowhere, quite literally. There were no other buildings as far as the eye could see. A rusty sign hung over the parking lot, which was half blown over by sand. The park itself was set about 50 meters back from the road, encapsulated by a tall fence of wooden boards decorated by badly painted pictures of children playing amongst snow-dappled conifers. A huge gate in the middle held a pair of turnstiles underneath the banner of Santa's Christmas Land. I pulled out a cigarette from the pack in my pocket and leaned against the side of the car, smoking it and surveying the scene. There were only 2 other cars in the car park. They both looked like they had been there for some time, or at least as far as I could tell across the sea of discarded wrappers and burger cartons. It was silent, except for the sound of the hot wind. After finishing my cigarette, I stamped it out on the ground and went for the front entrance. The turnstile swung loosely in the breeze on rust-caked hinges. I pushed through hesitantly, seeing a small table next to the entrance, a dirty plastic ice cream tub labeled Honesty Box, $5. It contained only a couple of dead spiders and a single solitary dollar bill. Coldly, I rooted through my wallet and scraped out a few dollars to toss into the box. After I had paid my way in, I looked around. The park was built from porta-cabins and old shipping containers arranged around a large, darkened house that slumped decrepit on a sea of dried scrub. The jauntily arranged plastic snowmen, icicles, and tinsel gave the entire scene an air of the bizarre. Dust swirled in the thick air, lazy and silent in the afternoon sun. I approached one of the nearest buildings labeled Nativity. The door was slightly ajar, so I pushed on it, and it creaked open, throwing light onto the darkened room. A low wattage bulb hung flickering on the roof. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I closed the door behind me and entered into the heavy silence. The room contained several dusty dioramas of the Nativity, all flaking and covered in spiders' webs. I looked at them disinterestedly, already beginning to doubt the quality of this theme park. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the hum of an air con. The tiny motes of dust that coated the floor were distributed by my footprints into tiny clouds in the dim light. I was beginning to notice things like this in the uncomfortable silence. I progressed into the next room, where things took a turn for the weird. The entire room was striped here. I could see stands where dioramas had been, but they had all been spirited away. It was odd, but not entirely unsurprising from this crappy place. After looking through 3 more empty rooms, I gave up and left that cramped building. It looked like Everything except the first diorama had been torn out, like someone had decided they needed a tiny plastic Jesus in their life so much that they'd leaned over and stuffed the characters of the nativity scene into their jacket. It was almost laughable in its pathetic nature. I wandered over to the reindeer pen and stared at the plastic animals for a few minutes, lighting up another cigarette as I did so. The silence hanging heavily in the air was overwhelming. I could feel 100 tiny pinpricks on my back, like the pressure of someone's eyes burrowing into me from behind. I turned to look in paranoia, but still, the big house remained dark and empty. Not a soul in sight. On the horizon, the sun, a golden bullet hole in the flesh of the sky, was melting away into the distant mountains, setting my fragile world into a squalid half-light and casting dark, dancing shadows across the walls and window frames. Lighting another cigarette to replace the burnt-out one, I took deep, shaky breaths. Coming here had been a bad idea. I saw that now. I felt the sticky evening heat crawling over my body, and my flesh quivered slightly. My next stop, according to the rusty signs that covered the park, was the Elves' Village. The Elves' Village was in reality a set of garden sheds, as depicted so humorously by the leaflet. In real life, though, they just looked sad. As I approached the nearest one, there was a clatter from within. I hesitated, realizing someone might be inside. As I approached the nearest one, there was a clatter from within. I hesitated, realizing someone might be inside. "Hello?" I called nervously through my clamped teeth. "Anyone there?" There was another sharp banging, followed by a smash. "Are you all right?" I tried the handle. It was stiff, but with a bit of force, I hit it open and half stumbled into the shed. The place was a mess. There was torn-up wrapping paper coating the floor, along with a few smashed snow globes. Animal feces was stained all along the wood, and it reeked. I saw the source of the noise, a small, disheveled cat huddled in the corner. It meowed at me loudly before jumping up and sprinting out in between my legs. I half laughed in relief, following the animal as it disappeared round the big house with my eyes. It was gone. I looked around inside, recoiling once more at the smell before slamming the door. It must have been living in there for some time. It seemed odd that such a small animal could have survived out here. The place seemed completely empty, and coyotes that ate cats like that for a light snack roamed the wastelands at night. It was certain I wasn't going back in through those vomit-inducing sheds, so I followed the cat in the direction of the big house. When I got to the front door, though, I was dismayed when I was met with the spray-painted words, "Closed for repair." A hefty padlock further dissuaded anyone who dared to doubt the words. I raised an eyebrow in annoyance, and was almost ready to call it a day when I heard the noise coming from that house. It sounded like the cat again. From somewhere within the derelict structure, it was wailing pitifully. The noise was like nails being dragged down a chalkboard, but definitely came from an animal. An animal that was, by the sound of it, in some kind of indescribable pain. What can I say? The next thing I knew, I was skirting the edge of the house. The next thing I knew, I was levering open the basement window. Next thing I knew, I was lowering myself down onto the dusty floor. And next thing I knew, I was inside. The basement was lined wall to wall with cardboard boxes, all overflowing with Christmas decorations. With only the fading light of the window to illuminate the room, I picked my way around the maze of boxes and went for the light switch. There was a flick and a sharp buzzing from somewhere within the building, but no light came on. "Shit," I hissed, nervously eyeing the dark crevices, not wanting to be caught in an abandoned house in the pitch dark. My eyes fell on a small electric lamp shaped like the head and shoulders of Santa Claus. Praying it still had batteries, I flicked the switch, and it spilled a feeble orange glow out onto the room. Well, anything was better than using my lighter. The stairs up were covered in dust like everything else, but on the third step from the top I saw a pair of footprints in the sediment, like someone had been walking down, then changed their mind. I felt a bit foolish as I emerged into the hallway, covered in cobwebs and toting a kid's Santa lamp. The desperate screeching came again, though, and it spurred me on. The hall seemed like any other at Christmas, albeit abandoned. Leaflets for Santa's Christmas land littered the floor, trampled into the threadbare carpet. Some faded fairy lights were strung along the walls, and much to my surprise, they were blinking weakly. Hello? I felt bile rise in my throat as I came to the realization that my assumption of emptiness may have been premature. Are you all right? I decided my best option was to find this goddamn cat and get the hell out of here. Somewhere from the depths of the house I could hear, "All I want for Christmas is you," drifting through the seemingly abandoned halls. It was muted by thick walls and carpets, but still recognizable. I repeated my greeting, but there was no response. Steeling myself, I glanced down the hallway, trying to discern where the noises were coming from. Eventually, I elected to head in the direction of the kitchen. This place had at least 3 floors, so I had to search them one by one. The kitchen door was half ajar, so I approached. I took a nervous glance inside, fingers playing apprehensively on the door handle. Like the hall, the kitchen was lit by cheap Christmas lights, which pulsed maddeningly, shining on the cracked tiles in sticky orange, pink, green, red, and blue. Plastic food was arranged jauntily along the work surfaces, adding to the artificial air. With a creak, I pushed into the room and looked around. Empty. I breathed a sigh of relief and raised my Santa's lantern to look. The room seemed like any other kitchen save for plastic food and overabundance of Christmas decorations and dust. Footprints crisscrossed the floor in seemingly random patterns. God knows how long they'd been there. The rest of the first floor seemed normal enough, similarly decorated. There was a living room, a small, crappy toilet, a cloakroom, and a single locked door, which I left in state, although the sign on the entrance had read dining room. It was only when I got to the stairwell that things started to get weird. A Santa Claus lawn ornament hung from one of the banisters. As in, hung with a noose. In this case, a noose made of tinsel. I gulped slowly at this macabre sight, rubbing my own neck skittishly. I kept my eyes firmly glued on the executed ornament as I climbed the stairs, half expecting it to come to life. Fortunately, no such sinister reanimation occurred, so I sidestepped it, leaving it still swinging in thin air. The landing was cordoned off with those ropes that you often get in theme parks or at airports, directing you into the rooms in specific order. The first room I entered was completely empty, as bare as the nativity scene had been. I crossed the landing and tried the next room. This one was slightly more sinister. It was filled with puppets, just ordinary marionettes or finger puppets, many of them dressed as Santa Claus or elves. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine as I entered. In the fading light, their painted eyes glinted dangerously. That's when he came from behind. He must have been hiding amongst the puppets or something. I felt a set of strings slip around my neck. tangling across my head. I struggled as whoever was on the other side pulled tight. They snapped, flicking across the room. Suddenly free, I jumped forward away from my would-be strangler, but he was still upon me. He slammed the puppets against my temple, impact jarring my vision. I slipped, legs buckling beneath me. The attacker was atop me. He grabbed my collar. He began to assault me with the marionette once again, the vicious blows resounding through my skull as the man straddled me and began to put more and more weight into his impacts. I could just see the Santa lamp rolling away from me on the floor as I blacked out. I don't know what time it was when I awoke. A pair of thick curtains cast the room in perpetual gloom, nor did I know exactly where I was. I was lying on a bed, underneath a duvet cover. My hands were bound by duct tape, so were my legs, so was my mouth. I couldn't feel the reassuring weight of my phone in my pocket. Resisting the urge to scream silently and writhe, I steadied my breathing and tried to let my eyes adjust to the low light. As my pupils dilated, I saw that I was in a child's bedroom. The walls were basted with wallpaper depicting Santa Claus, and toys were strewn across the floor. There was a fireplace in one corner with a wooden board in front of it. As I looked down, I saw the quilt was a child's, also depicting several teddy bears having a picnic. The entire scene was lit once again by Christmas lights. It's hard to describe how scared I was right then. My entire body was shivering. My mind, though, my mind was even worse. It reeled nauseatingly, my vision swirling in a sickening dizziness. I started to sob. I felt... No, I knew I was going to die. It was horrible. There was a plate of cookies on the nightstand and a tall glass of milk. It looked like they had been there for years. Cobwebs covered the biscuits, where they had brown and caked with some kind of hairy mold. I swear, one even had a mushroom sticking out of it. And the milk, though, the milk was even worse. It was nigh on solid, streaked with dark, curdled veins, and had a thick sheen of green growing on the surface. The smell emanating from them was almost enough to make me vomit through my gag. The plate was labeled by a small index card. For Santa. I spent the next few hours before he came, sobbing out of fear. I was nearly in shock when he opened the door, breathing raggedly and heavy through my clogged nose. He was wearing one of those overhead masks, rubber or latex or something. This one was modeled after a reindeer. Heck, he'd even taped on a red nose. I moaned loudly through the gag when I saw him, eyes wide. I shook my head desperately and began edging backwards, further into the bed. "Don't worry." His face was high and slow. It definitely belonged to a man, though. "Don't worry," he repeated. "We're just going to celebrate Christmas." He tried to stifle a giggle, but failed. We're going to have a great Christmas." He approached me, boots squeaking on the floor. "It's gonna be the best Christmas ever," he muttered through gritted teeth as he closed in. The man reached out and threw back the duvet cover. Briskly, he grabbed me by the scalp and tossed me to the floor, my head hitting the carpet with a crack. I let out a muffled scream as he slammed my head against the floor again. I think that was about when I blacked out for the second time. When I awoke, my captor was gone. I was still on the floor, in a pool of dried blood. He must have removed my gag and the duct tape from my limbs when I was out. I jumped up, running straight for the door. The adrenaline coursing through my veins imbued me with an unprecedented strength, and I rattled the handle with the ferocity of a lion. It wasn't enough. The wooden slab stood firm. "Fuck you! Fuck you!" I yelled repeatedly, sobbing loudly as I did and slamming my fists against the door. "Fucking let me out, you bastard!" As I roared, someone on the other side hit play on the stereo, and I heard Slade's "Merry Christmas, Everybody" begin to blast, drowning out my anguished cries. Shit. I muttered, tears running down my face. Slade was on loop for a couple of hours. In that time, I attempted climbing out of the windows, an escape attempt rapidly halted by my crippling vertigo, yelled myself hoarse, tore down the wallpaper, but most of all, I sat huddled in the corner, sobbing. I think I must have listened to Slade nearly 1,000 times when it finally stopped. I looked up from my corner at the door. "Hello?" I whispered. "Are you there?" There was a light tapping in the door before whoever was on the other end retreated into silence. Dawn broke outside the window. I could still see my car in the parking lot from the vantage point. I must have been on the 3rd floor or even the attic. On the distant highway, the occasional car passed. Desperately, I tried to catch their attention, but of course, it was an effort in vain. They were never going to see me from this far away. He came again just after dawn. This time, when I heard him approach, I ran to the door and pressed myself against it, trying to stop him from getting in. He was too strong and kicked open the door. I stumbled to the floor, weak and bruised. He burst in and began once again raining blows on me. I curled into the fetal position, trying to protect myself. He pulled out a rag and pressed it against my face, holding me down. The harsh chemical smell filled my nostrils and sent my mind reeling. My head began to spin and the room became a blur. I wasn't in the room when I awoke. I was somewhere else. It looked like a dining room, a long table stretched in front of me piled with the same plastic food that I'd seen in the kitchen. In the corner, a TV blared loudly, showing the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Warmth spilled out from a traditional fireplace. Once again, though, I had been gagged and bound. He sat at the other end of the table. For the first time I could see his face. He looked maybe 40, with thinning blonde hair, a strong chin, a mustache on his upper lip. He had lines on his forehead, but now he was smiling a thin, vicious grin. I groaned through my gag. My eyes stared daggers into him. Don't look at me like that. I had to take special measures to get you into the Christmas spirit. You're going to be Scrooge on Christmas Eve, aren't you? I continued, boring into him with my dark eyes. I've talked to Santa. It seems that you've been a very naughty boy this year, haven't you, Jack? I shook my head, warning him not to go there. He chuckled slowly, standing. You know what naughty boys get for Christmas, don't you? He approached the fireplace, pulled out a pair of tongs from the rack. He prodded the fire for a minute before tightening them around one of the embers. They only get cold. He laughed, holding the chunk of burning coal up to the light. It glowed dangerously, the heat searing my skin as he brought it close to my face. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable impact. He laughed at first quietly, then louder, shaking his head. He moved the burning coal away from my face and tossed it back into the fireplace. Relax. I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that. Not on Christmas. His laugh echoed loudly in my ears. Dropped the tongs on the floor. I breathed heavily in relief. Let's have a bit of Christmas dinner. I merely nodded obediently. Good. He purred and went towards the plastic turkey. I wriggled my hands while he was distracted, trying to free them from the duct tape that kept me bound to the chair. I twisted my wrist, and after a few seconds, my hands were free. Looking up, I saw my captor was still preoccupied, but before I went to unpeel my other hand, I spotted a steak knife on the mess of junk on the table. Checking. He still wasn't looking. I reached up and grabbed it just as he looked up. I pulled my arm back behind me, slipped the knife under my sleeve. You want some turkey? He dropped the plate down in front of me. It looked like he had attempted to serve the plastic turkey, tearing into shreds, and had piled the shreds of polymer onto my plate. We sat in silence for a moment as the man pretended to eat the turkey. Right. Enough of this bullshit. We'll get our presents out. He pulled out a neatly wrapped gift from underneath the table, adorned with fancy bow and a label. It says, to Jack from Carl Winters. He smiled warmly at me, placing it down in front of me. Go on, open it. He motioned. After a few seconds, he raised his eyebrows and sighed. Fine. I'll open it for you. It's fine. He muttered darkly to himself as he tore through the wrapping paper, just too quietly for me to hear. As the brightly colored wrapping paper fell away, I saw the shape of a high-end food processor emerge. He smiled proudly at me as it was fully removed from its wrapping. It's a food processor, top of the range. I thought you could use it in the trailer. A trailer of yours. His voice trailed off as he saw my expression. What? What? Don't you like it? He asked me. His smile now strained and his teeth gritted. After a few seconds of silence, he nodded slowly. Okay. Okay. It's fine. It was expensive, you know? I paid for it with my right hand, you know? But you don't like it, that's fine. That's fine. I put a lot of work into the wrapping, but it's okay. You didn't even want to open it! His voice began to raise, getting closer and closer to shouting. After a few seconds of fervent nodding, he sat and raised his eyebrows expectantly. Well? He sat there looking at me. What if he got me? The man searched me with his eyes. What have you got me? He said again more firmly. There was a second or two of silence. Suddenly, he snapped, tossing the chair across the room. What have you fucking got me for Christmas? The man roared. Tell me, you insolent piece of shit! I must have cowered back away from him because his face suddenly twisted in rage. You haven't got me anything! He screamed loudly. You wouldn't get your own father a Christmas present! He ran to the fire and grabbed the poker from the rack. I'll teach you the Christmas spirit, you insolent little brat! The man raised the poker above his head. That was when I struck with a knife. I slammed it into his abdomen about where his kidney should be. He squealed in pain and dropped the poker, clutching desperately at his wound. What have you done? I just wanted the family together at Christmas. I cut him off again with another stab at the abdomen, this time in the area of his digestive tract. Using what precise time the attack afforded me, I peeled off my hand and started at my leg. The man just stood there, blood running down his shirt and pooling on the floor below him. His face was pale. Slowly, he began to hum. I recognized the tune of Jingle Bells. Suddenly, I was free. He looked up from his wound at me, still humming. Slowly, he leant down for the poker. I kept at the same pace as him, backing for the door, neither of us making a sudden movement. Jingle bell, jingle bell, he began to murmur, his fingers clasping on the poker, mine the doorknob. Jingle all the way. He roared loudly and raised the poker. I tore open the door and sprinted through. Just seeing him jump at the table and come at me, I slipped away down the corridor. I had no idea how to get out of that labyrinth house. I guessed we were somewhere on the 3rd floor still, so I searched desperately for the stairs. When I found them, I took them 2 at a time, my captor right behind me. I could almost feel his breath on the back of my neck and heard the whoosh as he swiped with the poker. I saw the hanging garden ornament once again, and some bastion of hope in my heart opened when I realized I was on the ground floor. The main entrance was just 10 meters away. I ran to it, but suddenly I felt the ground fall from beneath my feet. The rug that covered the floor slipped and sent me tumbling to the ground. He was on me and prepared a blow with the poker. I brought the knife to his throat. With a wet shock, his eyes widened. I pushed him off, blood gushing down onto my clothes and face. Through his fluid cough, I heard him murmur, Merry Christmas to all. To all.